Hello, happy Friday. Well, as you know, I am not in class today, obviously. But what I want to do is not lose a class day, chance that we're behind, to make ourselves further behind. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity, using one of our Castify lessons again to try to move us forward. So on the page you see in front of you here with the Democratic, Republicans, and the Federalists, this is what we talked about in class, or in last time we did a Castify. We heard a little bit about that in Philadelphia, the role of Hamilton in creating the party system, that fight over the bank. You had the Jeffersonians, the Hamiltonians, different visions of America, different ways of looking at what was important and prioritizing things for America. Um, that's where we're going to pick up more on parties later on. But for right now, I just put this in here so you would have a sense of the District of Columbia being named in honor of Christopher Columbus. It'll be named Washington, D.C. in honor of Washington, but that won't happen for many years. What's kind of cool about this picture of D.C. is that this is a picture coming down what could very well be 16th Street or even Georgia Avenue into the city. And this would be sort of coming out of what we're in, sort of the higher elevations, down into the swampy area that will eventually be DC. But it's just kind of a cool view of the city, um, which I always enjoy looking at. Okay, now to understand what comes next is we have to go back a little bit and discuss our relationship with France. And to understand that, it's important to understand what was unique about the American Revolution. The American Revolution is the colonials who are British, but colonials who will find their way to break away from what they consider to be British imperial rule. People who want to sort of maintain the best of the British system, not throw the whole thing out, but kind of pick and choose. You see, there were traditions there that we really appreciated. The idea of a lot of the cultural and social history. There were elements of the law that we found to be really terrific. Our problem is really with taxes and not having any say in the government. So that's what pushes us into the American Revolution. Now, France is going to be a very different situation, and we have to understand what was going on in France in the French Revolution if we're going to understand this next phase in the United States. So, to understand what was going on in France, you have to understand that France, this whole time that England had evolved with the Magna Carta and then to a parliament and then this English Bill of Rights and all that, that in France, there had been nothing like that. They were ruled by what was called the ancient regime. Okay. A lot of the traditional sort of monarchy with the divine right of kings. And so when the French are going to go into their revolution and they are going to establish their revolution, they're going to throw out the whole thing. They want to just wipe it out and start over again. Not necessarily culturally, but certainly politically. They don't find anything worth keeping. And now to understand this, you've got to understand that France was ruled by, during this period, right, what is really right after the American Revolution in the 1780s and 90s, is we're going to move into here, was ruled by an absolute monarch named Louis XVI. Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette were absolute monarchs, meaning they ruled with total authority. Um, they had to do the one restriction on that, I guess, was taxes, that they still, if you go back and think about the old feudal system, that the king still collected taxes from the nobility, and the nobility collected theirs from the peasants. So this structure is still in place, but they believe they rule with the divine right. Divine right means that they believe that God on high has sort of has shown a light down, and they are to be the rulers. So you've got Louis XVI believing this incredible, sense of power and authority, his wife, Marie Antoinette. Well, what ends up happening is, if you look here, you got Louis XVI needs money. Well, if you think back to what happened before the 1790s and why Louis XVI might have gotten himself into a situation of needing money, all you have to do is go back into the French and Indian War, where they are going to lose badly to Britain. They are going to like, you think England had a huge amount of debt, so did France, and France lost. Plus, they lost all their colonies in the Americas. And then you add the American Revolution on that, in which they were very happy to join us and to help, what was happening with us defeating the British, but it's going to cost them very dearly. in our agreement in the Franco Alliance that we had, the Franco-American Alliance that we developed during the American Revolution, remember after Saratoga, is going to be with Louis XVI. So the way he decides that he wants to collect this money and get back on track financially is he's going to raise taxes. Just to give you a sense, excuse me, just to give you a sense here, this is France, just to sort of show you where everything is. It's just a nice little image of France map. Now, to understand France in 1789, you have to understand sort of their system, the what's called the Estates General. Okay, the Estates General was a structure or a mechanism that was put in place that would allow the king to be able to call together the structure of the structure of French society, the elements of French society, so that he could eventually establish his tax plan and bring money in. So when he calls this Estates General, and part of the reason why he called it was the second class, the second group of the states, the nobility, didn't want to pay their taxes to the king. They were resisting it. So he calls an Estates General, and the way the Estates General works is this: there are three levels of the Estates General. The first estate is the clergy, the second estate is the nobility, and the third estate is the people. In France, each estate gets one vote. If you go to the next page, this kind of lays out a little bit about who's in each estate. So the first estate here, you got the king is above all this. The first estate is the clergy. They comprise about 1% of the population. Now, again, France is a very Catholic country. They do not like the Enlightenment. They don't like any part of the Enlightenment because remember, the Enlightenment's about logic and reason and not necessarily following the traditional authorities. They paid no taxes, zero taxes. A total of 130,000 clergy is what we're talking about in the total. So that's why they're the little point here. Now, the second estate, okay, is the nobility. That's this little group right here. Okay, these are the people who are the wealthy landowners. 20% of the land was controlled by them. They too pay very little taxes. They also don't like the Enlightenment. Why? Because it's about logic and reason and about challenging authority and traditional systems that had been in place. 350,000 of them, and that's the people at the top. Everybody else, the other 97% of French society, fell into what was called the third estate. Now, within the third estate, there's a little bit of division. You've got sort of an upper level third estate, and then, which again still isn't that many, and then the vast majority of us will be down in the peasants. Okay, so you get your bourgeoisie here in the sort of the second level tier here, and then you've got the peasants with the bottom, 80%. But we're all make up what's called the third estate. 97% of the population, 24 million people. The bourgeoisie would be the professional class that often worked in service of the nobles, the merchants, professionals, carpenters, artisans, typically urban, but they don't have any of the extra advantages that you might see if you were one of the nobility. The peasants were just everybody else. The laborers, the poor farmers, they're the ones who work the noble's land, and the income they will pay to tax. Excuse me, the income paid in taxes to the king is 1/2 of what they make. Okay, so think about that. You've got this huge mass of people with absolutely no voice in government, no say at all, and basically just paying a fortune so that these people at the top, the nobility, the clergy, and the king, can live these extravagant lifestyles. Well, obviously, this does not bode well for what's coming. So the French Revolution starts with the calling of the Estates General. So the plan was to bring all the estates together and to let them have this official meeting. Well, what happened and what they did not foresee was, in large part inspired by what had happened in the American Revolution, the Third Estate begins to ask for certain reforms. They begin to demand certain reforms. The other two estates don't want anything to do with them, but they continue to demand. There's 24 million people that are in this third estate. They're sick and tired of it. by June of 1789, the Third Estate basically is like, we're out of here. We don't need this anymore. And they declared themselves a National Assembly. They actually went so far as to take an oath. It's called the Tennis Court Oath. And they take this oath on a tennis court. Duh. Why it's in tennis court road. But this tennis court oath was where they decide they are going to be a National Assembly and they are going to get rights for the people and they are not going to take it anymore. Okay? So you've got sort of this real trouble brewing. By the middle of July, the National Assembly basically was and again, it's the 80% of the population is demanding that France write a constitution. The other two estates and the king are resisting. So finally, this mob breaks into this thing up here. You can see it, the picture in the top left corner, called the Bastille. The Bastille was the political prison in Paris, where if anybody had spoken out against the king, if anybody had annoyed the king, that maybe had said something inappropriate or had maybe spoken out or become politically active against the king, they would throw him in the Bastille. Okay, well, the mob is going to seize the Bastille. They're going to break down the doors. They're going to tear down the doors. They're going to turn in. They're going to actually set fire to the Bastille. They're going to seize the weapons and all the stuff. It gets really violent. They attack some of the guards. They cut off their heads and they put them on pikes. Pikes were like big stakes, and they would put the head on a pike and then walk around through the streets on the pike. And this spreads all throughout the countryside. Eventually, the women are going to force the king back to Paris. He's been out in Versailles. They're going to force him back to Paris to deal with this crisis. Okay. So eventually, by the end of the summer, by August of '89, the National Assembly decides they are stepping up their game. They issue what's called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. This is their Declaration of Independence. You can, by the language alone, you can see the correlation or the connections to the American Revolution. It proclaimed the equality of all men. It declared that sovereignty, that is the rule, resided in the people, and asserted individual rights to liberty, prosperity, and security. Okay, sounds a little familiar, no? Okay, so basically there you've got that influence. I think that American Revolution influence. The motto of the French Revolution was liberty, equality, fraternity. So we can break the French Revolution really into kind of three stages or three phases. And again, this first stage here is the National Assembly. This is going to run, if you look, 1789 to 1791, really just as our Constitution is being established and we're sort of getting things up and going. The National Assembly has asserted its control or authority in France. They want to remake French society. They end everything from, if you can see, fees and labor services of the peasants. The church, which had tremendous amount of land all over the country. Catholic Church is extremely wealthy. They seized church land and turned it over to the public. They said the First Estate is gone. There's no such thing as clergy anymore. You don't exist. And in fact, they even go so far as to make the priests take an oath of loyalty to this new state. And basically, men of property could vote for legislatures, and they have all these things going on. Now, in the middle of this, as they're seizing power, they're kicking out the clergy. They've got the First and Second Estate on the run. They get a little ahead of themselves, and they start making these sort of, like this idea of exporting revolution. Well, at the same time as this is going on, two of the neighboring states that both have monarchies, Austria and Prussia, do not want a revolution to spread to Austria and Prussia. So they would rather restore Louis XVI. Okay, so they invade France to support Louis XVI and restore the regime. Not because they like Louis XVI, they like the idea of monarchy, and they don't want the idea that people should just rise up and throw over the king. So they do this. They were very concerned about this disintegration of monarchical authority. Um, Now, in the United States, our reactions to this, and if you've noticed, if you just go back here and take a look, the stuff here in yellow, the pages that are in yellow, I'm not going to ask questions on any tests about the pages in yellow. I put them here and included them in your notes because I think it's really important for context to understand. But the pages in blue, like normal, are the pages you need to know for any kind of test that's coming up. So if we move to the next page here, the French Revolution, you need to know what's on this page. U.S. reactions to stage one. So basically, there's what do they say? The best form of mimicry is the best form of flattery. To have them, base their revolution off us is kind of exciting. We sort of get this sense of, wow, we've done this. We're spreading democracy. We've got this great thing, and there's something pretty exciting about that, right? We didn't really like the king that much. We didn't like his absolutist power. It seemed antithetical to what we believed and who we were. And some Americans felt like this would be an opportunity to form a closer alliance with the French citizenry. People like Jefferson thought this was going to be a really good opportunity for us to develop strong relationships. And we felt kind of obligated to help France, but it was difficult because our official relationship with France was really, believe it or not, connected to the king. Now, we didn't like the king, but the king helped us beat England. So the enemy of my enemy is my friends. And so we were a little bit puzzled over what to do. But again, we've got our own issues going on at this time. We're watching the things evolve in France, but we're not quite ready yet to get involved. Now, we move into stage two here. Stage two is going to take a shift in France, and that shift is what is going to make Americans really take pause, because in stage two, you're going to have a more extreme element take control in France as part of this revolution kind of continues to evolve. Revolutionaries or extremists are going to establish what's called the convention, which is a legislative body elected through universal means everybody, male, man, suffrage. It's the first time we're going to see that word, but the word suffrage means the vote. So universal male suffrage means basically all men vote. Okay? They basically abolished the monarchy. They just voted and said, monarchy doesn't exist. It's gone, and declared France a republic. Okay? Again, we don't have any problems with that. We actually are okay with that. But then they start taking this turn. They start drafting people and resources into the war through, they're going to try to sort of use more and more people in their military. They're going to try to build it up. France then this has always been puzzling to me, but France, I think, got a little carried away with their newfound power and authority, and they declare war on Britain and Spain. Okay, to me, this is just, what were they thinking? But I think part of it was they got caught up in the excitement of revolution, and they got a little ahead of themselves here. A guy named Robespierre, you actually sort of identify him by his name here, Robespierre. That's sort of the best way to remember his name. You have to remember the first part. And the Jacobins. Okay, now these are people who are going to come to power in this next period here. And Robespierre and the Jacobins are going to be pretty darn extreme. They really believe that France requires, if this revolution is going to take, a complete restructuring. And we're talking about breaking down the basic fundamental elements of society. And between 1793 and 1794, they are going to wage this extraordinary campaign. And it's going to be a campaign of terror that they are going to direct at the general population, because they feel like they've got to break down all these old structures. A lot of this is sort of this Enlightenment thinking run wild, logic and reason. Now, what they're doing, I would argue, is the absence of reason, but nevertheless, logic and reason. We're going to get rid of the church. We're going to get rid of the monarchy. We're going to get rid of the nobility. All these things gone. So one of the first targets that they make is on Christianity. this is a country that has, hundreds and hundreds of years of Catholic tradition, but they decide it's got to be gone. So they close the churches. They force priests who take a vow of celibacy. They were required to take wives and get married. And in some ways, what's interesting is they almost develop what some people refer to as the cult of reason, as like a secular alternative. It's this idea about whether or not atheists are a not a religion, but atheists have a a common viewpoint or something. And somehow atheists are all the same. Atheists are totally different. Somehow we try to think of them in this sort of cult of reason that today, people who adhere to a non-religious perspective or bias. And they got rid of their calendar. I mean, just things like, getting rid of the calendar so they don't have any more church holidays, things like that. This period is going to turn extremely violent, and is going to be known as the Reign of Terror. It gives you some clue of where we're going with this. The primary method by which they implemented this was by using the guillotine. For those of you who don't know what a guillotine is, as I will show you here. Now, if you look closely right here, where the cursor is, that is a blade. Now, that is a blade that is so sharp, I mean, it literally would cut through paper. And you see this little hole down here? And that little bench kind of behind it. People would lay down, they would raise this up, and they would kind of open it up, and you would put your head in between there, and they would close it. And you can't see it, but there's a space in between there for the guillotine. Your head down, there's a little basket, and they would release the guillotine. See, it's there, right there, it's wound up. They would just release it, and it would spin down, and the guillotine would, in one fell swoop, just decapitate you. So in that year we're talking about, between 93 and 70 and 94, there are estimates that they may have executed as many as 40,000 people. 40,000 people. Okay, they imprison another 300,000. And you can see these sort of these images that emerge from this period. Here you've got the revolution turning violent. And I'm going to try to get these out of the way so you can see this here. I mean, look at these people. And this is a cartoon from there. It's called, the Radical Arms. And here you've got the world kind of on fire. You've got the bloody guillotine, and you've got these kind of drunken peasants now taking over these, because again, this is about democracy. This is the mob, right? This is what, the ultimate of democracy, where the people rule. But it turns violent, and it's ugly, and it's about settling old scores. So much so that one of the primary targets that they're very excited about, sort of evening the score with, is Louis XVI and his wife. So if you look in this picture right here, here is the army, and there is Louis XVI laying on the platform, and here's the guy who's let the guillotine go, and there is Louis XVI's head. So basically, right there. And he's showing it out to the crowd. And there are these scenes where you can see him showing out to the crowd, and the crowd's going, ah, and they're just kind of this maniac mode, right? So it was very, very tough. They are both going to be murdered. Both he and his wife, Marie Antoinette, will be murdered in 1793, and they will be beheaded by the Jacobins and Robespierre. So remember how we were all excited, and this whole idea that they're kind of doing what we wanted, and they're kind of like our little child or something, kind of what comes out of that. Well, we weren't quite so keen on this anymore. Suddenly, kind of this shock of reality begins to hit. First of all, the whole point of being in relationship with somebody like this is that it was a reciprocal relationship, right? We could do things for them, they could do things for us. Well, it was clear France was not going to be in any position to help us. And as much as we did not like Louis XVI, the idea that the people themselves would just behead the king and queen, I mean, this seems kind of this anti-Christian. It seems wrong. Of course they're anti-Christian because they are anti-Christian, but it's just for us in America, being a very religious people, this is like, whoa, what is happening? There is a lot of fear over this reign of terror. What if it spreads to the United States? What are we going to do? And in fact, that treaty we talked about earlier, well, wasn't that treaty with the king? Well, where's the king now? The king dead. So if the king's dead, then what happens to our treaty? Is our treaty dead? So that was the big question that comes about. Plus, France had started approaching us, and the government under Maximilien Robespierre and the Jacobins had kind of implied that they thought we should be helping them fight against our old enemy, Britain. Well, but the problem is we're just getting our financial house in order, and one of the primary people that we need to be trading with is Britain. So should we join France in war against Britain if we need Britain to trade with? So this becomes a problem. And we are really struggling with what to do. On the one hand, there was a lot of debate about our alliance. The Jeffersonians under, the Democratic Republicans absolutely believed we should help France. Um, Jefferson will talk a lot about the extreme elements and the extreme elements in the French Revolution, but he said it's kind of like, they're just in this kind of wild phase and it's going to all calm down pretty soon. And once it calms down, we need to be there. We need to guide them. We're sort of their inspiration. We need to help them, achieve all the things they want to do. They're like our child, right? And we should help them push towards individual rights and push towards democracy and push towards this great thing we've figured out here in this country. Okay. Hamilton, on the other hand, who has never had very much like for the French at all, is freaking out. He is like, what is wrong with you, Jefferson? There is no way we should be part of that. They just cut the head off the king. There's no way we want to be part of that. He wants to avoid all involvement, the mob violence. We need somebody stable. We need order. And going back to what was Hamilton's preference originally anyway, he believed we should be aligning ourselves with England, with Britain, because he said we share a language, we share a culture. These French have obviously demonstrated they're too extreme for us. Let's get back to sort of our tradition. We're separate now, we've got our own country, but let's go back and let's make nice with Britain. Well, Jefferson thought this was outrageous, said, how can we just turn our backs on our ally, right? Our former ally. So this fight is going back and forth between Jefferson and Hamilton. And in the meantime, in April of 1793, a man from France will come to the United States. His name is Genet. Now, Genet, it will go by the title Citizen Genet. They were no longer Madame or Sir because that implied nobility. So everyone who was part of the revolution and part of the sort of the Jacobins and this Republican government established in France would go by the title citizen. Well, in 1793, he was appointed as ambassador to the United States. He comes to the United States. The guy is from, everything I've read, he is obnoxious. He is charismatic. He is just this, he could draw people in, and he comes to the United States with the specific purpose and intention of trying to get Americans to come and join the French in this French Revolution. He wants to try to rile us up and bring over privateers. He's hoping that Americans will be so inspired by their revolution baby, that their democracy baby, that they're going to jump on their ships and sail over and help the French, out in their war against England and their war against Spain, and that we're just going to jump right into it, right? Well, he's basically going around in the United States. Now, there's a couple of problems. When you are an ambassador to a country, the first thing you must do when you get to a country is you should go and present yourself to the officials, to the local government. Well, he never does this. So he, first of all, already has alienated some people in Washington because he's not following proper protocol. Now, whether he knew or didn't know, whatever, but he doesn't follow proper protocol. Our Secretary of War warns Washington. he said, we should not be taking sides, because if we take sides in this thing, we're setting ourselves up for trouble. But I'm worried about this joker, Genet, that Genet is going to get enough Americans involved. And if Americans get hurt or Americans get injured, then we might be drawn into this war, even though we don't want to be part of it. And Genet was already at this point traveling all over South Carolina, and was huge crowds were turning out to hear him speak, and people were really kind of buying into this idea. Well, Washington decides he's going to nip this in the bud. He announces at the same time in April 1793 what is called the Proclamation of Neutrality. Okay, neutrality means we are not going to be taking sides in this war between France or England. We simply are not going to do it. This is not our conflict. In fact, we're not even sure why you're fighting. We do want no part of it. We want to be friends with both of you. We do not want to engage with either of you when it comes to war. They passed some laws locally that made it prohibition against Americans joining the war in support of the French side, or anything that might potentially jeopardize our neutrality. Because theoretically, if you've got Americans over fighting in France for the French and then they get killed again, like I said, we might get drawn to the war. So basically, the Neutrality Proclamation says you can't choose sides. Americans are not allowed to do this. Jefferson, I want you to just imagine Jefferson, how much he loved Washington. First of all, Jefferson lost on the bank. He loses on the Whiskey Rebellion. He thought Washington way overreacted with the Whiskey Rebellion. He believes this proclamation of neutrality is fundamentally flawed. It is turning our back on an ally. There is nothing good about it. And he is absolutely certain that the person to blame for all of this is Hamilton. So he is just furious. Now, in reality, if we step back and look at what was going on, I think most historians would tell you that this was absolutely the right decision for us. There was no way we were in a position to join a war. Think about what we talked about with the huge debt we're carrying, with the plans we're trying to do. We're just trying to get our financial house in order. We simply don't. Now, we don't want to go around telling everybody our problems, but we also don't really feel like we're in a position where we can get drawn into this conflict. So he's going to do that. When Washington announces he stays out, but we're going to stay out of this, he's going to be setting a precedent, one of many, in which we are not going to engage in foreign conflicts, unless we are directly involved in them. Well, Genet is really upset about this. Genet totally ignores this idea of neutrality and continues going out there trying to solicit and trying to bring, people into the war effort. Well, Washington finally gets so exasperated that he basically tells Genet, if you keep this up, you keep these shenanigans up, I will kick you out of the country. You will not be welcome in the United States. Okay, you will be gone. Now, for Genet, this is a problem, because in the time that he has come and has now starting to live in the United States during this period when he's been, whipping up support, there's already been a transition of power in France. And the people that were in power that sent Genet to the United States have all been kicked out, and many of their heads have been cut off. So Genet goes back to France. In all likelihood, he faces the guillotine. So he very quietly disappears kind of into the western. I believe it's western Pennsylvania is where Genet ends up spending the rest of his life, and he basically just kind of disappears off into history. Basically like, okay, throw away the key. And that's kind of what happens to Genet. But again, it shows you this level of that Washington trying to juggle all these different interests and all these different things that are going on. Okay. Looking here, I don't want to get into Great Britain. I think we'll try to do that over the weekend. This is already 34 minutes, so that's plenty of time. Okay. We will talk soon. Have a great weekend, and I will talk to you later.